Hey class, so this is introduction to lip syncing and mouth shapes, and also using symbols to create puppet animation. So to become more efficient, animators started using rigs made up of multiple pieces of a character. So today we're going to create a very simple character. So please don't go elaborate on this at all. And then in the next video, we will animate and create different mouth shapes that we can then use in our dialogue. Let's get started. So I created a very simple character here who is just hair, face, and neck, and then just a attached body. I can keep her hair pieces, these pigtails, separate, and her eyebrows separate so that I can animate them as well. However, that is completely optional and totally dependent on how comfortable you're feeling with your time. So I did a really rough draft here, and now I'm just going to use my either pen tool or pencil tool to create a new version that is going to have a little cleaner line work. And I'm also going to, let's see, turn down the opacity of my earlier one. Here we go, so I can see. And I'm going to lock this layer. We're going to keep all of these parts separate. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. So remember, when you're drawing with the pencil tool, it is going to be drawing with the actual line there. So I want to just make sure, get rid of that. And what it does is create a nice smooth vector line that I can then adjust the stroke on later. So now if I select this, I can change my stroke size. And if I use the sub-selection tool and click it, you can see all of the different points that make up my, my stroke. So I could then adjust these points later if I like. In contrast, the fluid brush tool does more of an outline. So let me undo that. Let me make the size bigger. So now if I use the sub-selection tool on my fluid brush line, you can see that this has outlined it with points versus the pen tool actually creates the line, the stroke out of points. So that's the difference, and you're free to use whichever one you're more comfortable with. You know what, for this particular piece, I think using the pen tool actually makes a lot more sense. So let me just use that with a stroke of 3. There we go. And for the fill, I'm just going to make this transparent for now and fill it later. Okay, so with the pen tool, I can just kind of create a little area for the neck. Remember to change an anchor point from sharp or smooth to sharp. You can just click on it. But actually I can just curve this around. It's okay if my head is overlapping a little bit. But let me try one more time. So here, go up back here and wrap around and down. Yeah, this pen tool is really nice. So just click it to make a sharp corner. So remember, the fewer points you can make your lines with, in a lot of ways, the better, because you'll have smoother curves. Sometimes it's nice to have just a little extra control in certain areas, especially if you're new to the pen tool. There we go. All right. And one more for this. Cool. And a little bit more here. Okay, so one piece is done, and I'll speed this up a little bit. Okay, so I have created the rest of my character using that pen tool, and I know that you guys have created plenty of characters up to this point, so I don't want to bore you with the whole process, but I do want to show you a couple tips that are important. One, I created a color palette layer when I was starting to do my fill, so that's this layer down at the bottom that has most of my color palettes on it. And I just used it to easily select with my eyedropper and fill with the paint bucket, and that keeps my colors consistent. The next thing that you'll notice is that I have significant amount of layers up to this point. So I have my color palette layer, I have my initial sketch, which is hidden, and then I have a piece, let's do this, show frame, my back of my sweater, I have the neck, I'm not sure why that says mouth chins, but that's okay. That's my front of my sweater. I have different pieces for my right ponytail. I have my face. I have a copy of my face with only half of the mouth, so I'll explain that in a minute. I have my left ponytail, my right ponytail separate because they can be animated that way. My hair is a separate layer. The eyebrows are separate, and they could each be separate from each other, so they could rotate as well. The eyes, they're not quite perfect, but they are on separate layers. And then this front piece of hair here that could be animated as well is a separate layer. So I want you to create and organize your layers so that they're separate from each other, so that any piece that could be animated animated on its own should be a separate piece. Now let's talk about that face piece for a second here. The way that mouths work, the top of our teeth and our top lip are attached to the top of our skull, so that part doesn't move when we speak, but our chin has that big pivot point on it, and so the lower half of our face will be moving. So when we're creating our mouths for our faces, we're actually going to have different chins depending on how wide or not our mouth is. So keep that in mind, that we're going to actually go to, let's hide that layer. So we're actually going to cut our chin off at a certain point so that we can create additional chins that overlap with it. So keep the lower half of the face on a separate layer as well. And I'll explain that more in our lip sync video. For now, I'm just going to go and organize my layers a little bit more. And you can do this independently as well, but basically I'm going to add a folder. In this folder, I'm just going to call this like hair. And I can add my bangs by just like clicking on the layer, dragging it underneath that folder. So I think I probably actually want to add one that's eyes. Let's double click. And these folders can nest under other folders, so I want to make sure I'm not doing that. So I'm just going to drag that out. There we go. The hair will be on top, eyebrows, etc. And just be careful. I know my right ponytail overlaps with the face, so it actually needs to be below the other parts. And I don't want to bore you with all of this, but I do want to show you just one more thing. So if I want to split my eyebrows, I'm going to select the layer and make sure that nothing else is unlocked, because otherwise it will grab those other layers. I'm just going to use my selection tool on my eyebrow layer. and that will select both. So if I click on eyebrows, it selects the whole layer. I can use my lasso tool to select just this right eyebrow and cut it, and then add a new layer and call that right brow, and then paste it in place. So that's how I would just divide those. And let's just make that a little shorter. And so now what I have is I have one kind of folder for the hair, the bangs, the main piece of the hair, the left ponytail. I have the face, which I can move. I want to move these face pieces underneath. There we go. So the face, grab that into that layer. So I do need to make sure this eyes are above the face. And then I have my eyes, my brows as well. And then I have my body as well as that right ponytail piece. And then what's nice is you can turn these on and off as a group as well as individually. So I also need to figure out where that extra line work is coming from. And then finally I have a folder with my reference. So this isn't super important, but it is helpful to keep all of your pieces organized before we move on to the mouths and the chins. So let's talk about those in the next video, and we can move on from there. All right, thanks, class.